We assume modern political movements are driven by rational demands, economic policy, institutional reform, or tax rates. But when you observe how mass mobilization actually behaves on the ground, that rational framework entirely falls apart. This diagram shows the baseline requirement for a movement to be considered populist, the populist minimum. It requires a vertical hierarchy severing society into two groups, a corrupt elite at the top and a pure public at the bottom. This struggle adopts a Manichaean worldview, dividing politics into conflicting forces of absolute light and absolute darkness. Despite this intense good versus evil dualism, the specific structural relationship between populism and religion remains a heavily neglected area in political science literature. Religious populism operates as a specific two-dimensional subtype through distinct architectural frameworks. This flowchart outlines how these movements utilize one of two pathways. The first is the overt co-opting of existing faith, the politicization of religion. The second is the covert elevation of secular politics into a faith of its own, the sacralization of politics. Mapping these two pathways reveals the structural mechanisms modern political actors use to leverage the human desire for transcendence for worldly power. The politicization of religion branch relies on the strategic use of existing holy books on scriptural traditions. Here, political actors use revealed religion to legitimize their community and demonize their secular targets. The first recognized populist movement, the US-based People's Party of the 1890s, relied heavily on Protestant evangelicalism. They framed economic reform as a cosmic battle, pitting the forces of God and democracy directly against those of Satan and tyranny. In the 21st century, this exact architecture appeared in T-evangelicalism. As you can see in this rally, patriotic and religious protest iconography are physically blended. These groups explicitly framed constitutionally limited government as a biblical mandate, arguing that state taxation inevitably leads to despotic enslavement. This structural tactic crosses doctrinal differences. The rise of Islamism demonstrates the extreme politicization of traditional faith outside of Western Christendom. During the 1979 Iranian Revolution, leaders utilized Shia messianism to frame a secular revolution as a holy cause. The Ayatollah Khomeini mobilized the Ummah, the global Islamic community, as the dispossessed, fighting against traditional, corrupt elites. Subsequent leaders maintained this religious mandate by acting as sole interpreters of divine will. Here, former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is framed directly beneath Khomeini, vowing to return to the ideals of the revolution against secular modernizers. In Judaism, Israel's ultra-Orthodox Shas party functions as a complete populist movement. The party leadership integrates religious authority into its political structure, advocating for a state run by Jewish religious law, while mobilizing oppressed social classes against secular Ashkenazi elites. The overt path thrives because it plugs into deeply rooted theological networks. It allows political actors to speak a language of absolute truth, entirely bypassing the need for rational political debate. The second branch operates covertly through the sacralization of politics. In these cases, politics detaches from routine administration. It acquires a transcendent nature, experienced by its followers as an absolute force. Sociologist Max Weber famously described the forward march of modernity as a process of sacralization, a rationalization of human life that systematically replaced mystery with calculation. But this independence of politics from established religion created a massive spiritual vacuum in public life, leaving citizens craving ultimate meaning and guidance. Populism fills this void by offering an enchanted garden. The secular political cause itself provides that ultimate purpose, completely independent of traditional organized religion. To achieve this, the movement consecrates the people as a holy entity. In turn, the opposing elites are fought not as political rivals, but as the literal embodiment of evil on earth. Standard democratic pragmatism relies on piecemeal reform. Sacralized politics operates entirely on the promise of an extraordinary, redemptive rupture with the status quo. Maintaining this illusion requires a highly specific architectural blueprint, which scholars categorize as missionary politics. It relies on three load-bearing pillars: charismatic leadership, a moral community, and a mission of salvation. By transforming political parties into congregations, sacralized populism generates a level of member commitment that mimics religious faith. This insulates the movement, making it highly resistant to traditional political attacks. This grid breaks down the first pillar of sacralized politics, charismatic leadership. Internal movement narratives construct the leader as a messianic figure, granting them sacred authority based on 6 distinct archetypes. In the French Front National, founder Jean-Marie Le Pen was framed internally as the sole holder of the flame of French civilization. In the Latin American left-wing case study, Venezuela's Hugo Chavez described being driven by a hurricane-like force that exceeded his own personal aspirations. Both leaders utilize the first 2 archetypes, the prophet who shatters the false reality of the elites to speak hidden truths, and the moral archetype who guides followers by life example rather than argument. The third archetype is the martyr. The leader proves their stoic dedication to the mission by sacrificing their health, freedom, or well-being for the cause. Fourth and fifth, they are the literal embodiment of the people, demotic and unmediated, as well as the founder and living personification of the party itself. Finally, they operate as the missionary. They project a narrative of historical chosenness, positioning themselves as carrying the ultimate formula for the nation's salvation. Despite their diametrically opposed ideologies, Chavez and Le Pen utilized this exact 6-part messianic architecture. It allowed them to override normal political accountability and demand absolute trust from their followers. The second pillar is the moral community. Activists are separated from profane society through an integrated system of myths, rites, and symbols that elevate the group into a sacred entity. Historical figures are resurrected as living avatars to guide this present community. For Le Pen's followers, Joan of Arc served as an eternal symbol of French greatness, independence, and sovereignty. Venezuela demonstrates an exact structural parallel. Chavez elevated Simón Bolívar into a living spirit, guiding the struggle to liberate the country from the oligarchy. This connection is maintained through mass ritual. Processions and rallies in sacred locations, like this gathering at the Joan of Arc statue, generate collective effervescence, objectifying the brotherhood of the movement. The immense scale of these mobilizations proves the strength of the non-material, spiritual bond forged between the charismatic leader and the moral community. The third and final pillar is a mission of salvation. This requires a specific political millenarianism, in which the movement seeks the total purging of perceived earthly evil. The movement relies on an eschatological myth, the belief in an impending fullness of time, where the corrupt present is violently abolished to make way for a redemptive, earthly future. These 2 pillars transform political participation from a mundane civic duty into a cosmic imperative. Losing an election is framed not as a temporary setback, but as an apocalyptic victory for evil. Political scientists are often skeptical of these frameworks. It is easy to assume that religious overtones, historical myths, and savior complexes are merely rhetorical flourishes used to win campaigns. The empirical data rejects that assumption. In radical cases, this is a fully functional, observable structural mechanism that dictates movement behavior and voter mobilization. This vibrant architecture stands in stark contrast to standard contemporary politics. Traditional parties have largely abandoned grand visions of worldly salvation in favor of piecemeal, bureaucratic management. This disenchantment of politics leaves voters apathetic toward conventional representation. It creates a critical vulnerability in the democratic system that populist movements systematically exploit. Populism thrives in this environment specifically because it refuses to be normal politics. It injects the political sphere with passion, wonder, and a compelling mythology that standard administration cannot match. Modernity pluralized where people look for the sacred, allowing the ballot box to become an instrument of earthly salvation. To understand the rise of modern populism, analysts cannot simply measure material economic demands. They must measure a movement's capacity to fulfill the human desire for transcendent, redemptive purpose.